Welcome to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. My name is Larry Bodine, and I will be your host today. We're honored to have our speaker, Barbara Warren, a member of DGT. Barbara, say hello to everybody again.
Hi.
It's great to have you. Before we get to Barbara, we had a couple of quick announcements. Let me call on the inimitable Kathy Ramage-White to give us a message about membership.
Okay, inimitable. That's hard to say, inimitable, but that's okay. I am Kathy Ramage-White, and I am the second vice president who is responsible for giving the spiel weekly. If you have not yet joined DGT, it's real easy. Just go online and click where you come on into the DGT website, and it's really good. Axe Blue will serve you great. And our speaker obviously is already a member, and we have a guest from Washington, D.C., or not Washington, D.C., Washington State, correct?
Correct.
And you're going to join, correct?
Absolutely. I can't wait.
All right. See? There's no limit to where you can come from since we're doing Zoom. So that's good stuff. It's only $20, and we'd like all of you to be members and enjoy listening to our speaker today. Back to you, Larry.
All right. Thanks very much, Kathy. Let me call on Sandy Binion to tell us what we've got coming up in the future.
Okay. Next Monday, because we call our meetings are always Monday from noon to 1 o'clock. We have Susan Bickle, who is the chair of LD9, and who's going to talk to us about the efforts they're going to be making, particularly in some of the more rural areas, to get out the vote and elect Democrats in November of 22. Then following that, we're going to have Claire Kipe, I think that's how you pronounce Kipe, and she's the political director of Arizona List. And so we've got some exciting things coming up, and hope you stay tuned, because in the future I have some other, I'm actually full through February and March. So I'm looking for April speakers right now, and I've got some people that I've already talked to, and I'm waiting to get for people to get back with dates. So stay tuned.
I was just going to say, let me introduce our speaker today, and that's you, Barbara. Arizona faces a dramatic rise in extreme heat. More than 200,000 people living in Arizona are especially vulnerable to extreme heat. And today, Dr. Barbara Warren will address how to respond and reverse the climate change emergency. She'll talk about addressing social and environmental justice and preventing global catastrophe by eliminating nuclear weapons. Barbara is a specialist in internal medicine and public health. She has worked in medical academia, community medicine, and health services administration for her entire 40-year medical career. Currently, Barbara is the director of the Arizona chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility. She's a leader in the Tucson chapter of Progressive Democrats. She's a Precinct Committee person and LD9, as am I. Hats off to you. And she's a working advocate for 100% clean, renewable, and efficient energy production. So Barbara, the floor is yours. Tell us about it.
Thank you very much. It's pretty exciting to have people here with us today who have actually had a very important part and continue to have a very important part in the things that I want to talk about today. So to start, in 2013, excuse me, the Arizona chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility, also known as PSR, and 40 co-sponsors offered a day-and-a-half-long community conference in Tucson, Arizona, at the Tucson Convention Center. This was called Climate Smart Southwest. One of the keynote speakers was Dr. Eric Kleinenberg, a sociology professor at New York University, who wrote the book in 1995 called Heat Wave, a social autopsy of disaster in Chicago. There were 521 people who died and over 1,000 people who were hospitalized with heat-related illnesses. Dr. Kleinenberg's sociology studies of this and other climate disasters highlight the lack of social cohesion and preparedness as key factors resulting in excess deaths in the case of extreme climate events. Meanwhile, it's hotter than ever every year in Tucson, right? So then, how can we build social cohesion and preparedness in our communities? As a result of a workshop at this Climate Smart Southwest conference that I was just speaking of, PSR organized a group to embark on building resilient neighborhoods, to work on building neighborhood level preparedness for extreme heat events in our community. And I'm so excited that Donna is here because she was the key leader in making this group come together. She pulled us together and led this effort for a long time until she left town. This area of disaster focus was chosen because of our well-known geographical climate challenges of extreme heat, coupled with several studies indicating that our regional power grids are quite vulnerable to extreme heat, which could cause a 2 to 3 week regional power outage, while efforts are being made to repair our power grid that serves 4 southwestern states. Additionally, we learned from several local disaster response agencies in the city of Tucson that we must be prepared to shelter in place, meaning stay home. That sound familiar these days? In the event of a climate disaster, except when serious illnesses or injuries require hospitalization. Since our Climate Smart Southwest conference in 2013, we have created a team that developed a 3-hour-long workshop presentation accompanied by planning workbooks and a take-home citizens guide. And I have a copy somewhere here to show you later if you'd like, which is available in English and Spanish. And we trained a cadre of workshop facilitators and presented workshops to over 45 Tucson neighborhoods and community groups. We received a sub-grant in 2015 from the U.S. Center for Disease Control through the University of Arizona School of Public Health. This grant was designed for us to offer special workshops and follow-up planning in 3 different kinds of high-risk and low-income neighborhoods, and to evaluate the unique challenges and unique challenges and outcomes for each group. We worked in a low-income isolated Hispanic community, a government housing project for homebound elderly and disabled people, and a facility caring for at-risk Native Americans. In retrospect, we might have also included a community of people living in manufactured homes, quote unquote. It's what they're called these days. They're usually homes located in trailer parks that are very vulnerable to extreme heat. The objective of these workshops are to educate members of our communities on, first of all, the health impacts and management of extreme heat exposure. Secondly, the need for and ways to prepare for prolonged community-wide or regional power outages. Thirdly, the need for understanding the characteristics of and building neighborhood cohesion. Fourthly, ways to identify and help vulnerable members of our household and neighborhoods, very important. And fifthly, how to develop preparedness plans and emergency resources in homes and neighborhoods. And finally, how to build critically important cohesion and planning among neighborhood members. In short, we aim to engage and persuade neighborhoods to begin building resilience, preparedness, and community planning and action. In follow-up of our neighborhoods that sponsored these workshops, there has been a diversity of creativity, ongoing action in some, and no action in others. And ironically reinforcing the Kleinberg findings that in low-income, poorly cohesive neighborhoods, there is often little or no capacity for preparedness planning, action, or resource development, even when presented with community resources that might be available to help. On the other hand, among the various neighborhoods we reached, there have been a variety of interesting models and commitments to building resilience, such as the following. A co-housing community published and distributed a flyer called What to Do When the Power Goes Out, and organized their homeowners into preparedness sectors with action plans and block captions. And that was Donna's old neighborhood. They also repeated our workshops and periodically to include and train new members of their community as the housing turned over. So they've offered 2 or 3 or maybe more workshops already. A low-income government housing project for seniors and disabled were not capable of self-organizing. So members of a neighboring, more affluent community organized a food delivery program through Lend a Hand and built a roster of the high-risk residents and their special needs. And that way they learned how to help them in an emergency and learned who needed what kind of help. In a specialized rehabilitation community, Building Resilient Neighborhood trained residents to deliver more workshops and created an informative brochure and distributed it to neighboring homes outside of their facility. And finally, a large, well-established neighborhood created an educational brochure to distribute to other home residents in homes on their blocks to get to know more of their neighbors. And they also have sponsored 2 more Building Resilient Neighborhood workshops and 3 or more climate change mitigation and sustainability focused workshops as a result of the processes that we introduced. PSR has taken on further action in the last 7 years of this work on heat illness prevention to do several things. First of all, we've acknowledged that extreme heat is an ongoing and challenging problem, regardless of a power outage, especially for outdoor workers, people living in homes without adequate air conditioning, or people with disabilities and special needs. And I'm sure we can think of others. We contacted the Red Cross with city and county disaster preparedness agencies to try to understand their plans for shelters in the event of heat emergencies or power outages. We still don't know all the answers to our questions that we posed. We joined a national coalition of states and municipalities who are working on heat preparedness, sponsored by the organization Public Citizen, to share ideas and approaches to heat preparedness with others across the United States. And we participated in a University of Arizona sponsored heat awareness and preparedness project among public health departments and in communities along the entire US-Mexican border, sharing our Spanish language versions of our citizens guides with curanderos across the border. This effort was led by Dr. Greg Garfin at the University of Arizona, and that work still goes on. In 2019, we successfully requested our Tucson's Mayor Rothschild and the City Council to issue a proclamation for extreme heat awareness with recognition of the need to act on risk reduction, preparedness, and prevention of heat disasters and illness or deaths in our community. Mayor Romero is now building this work into the Tucson's new climate adaptation plan. We continue to support Congressman Raul Grijalva's bill, HR 3668. Please write that down and take action to support it. This is in Congress, it has been introduced, and it is to direct OSHA to issue national occupational and safety and health standards to protect workers from heat-related injuries and illnesses and death. It is called the Ascension Valadez Bill, which was named after a very tragic thing that happened to a young man who was working on a farm in Texas and was forced to work outside in extreme heat for 3 days straight without adequate training on heat illness, without adequate water, and without adequate breaks, most importantly. Previously Senator, now Vice President Kamala Harris has introduced a companion bill in the Senate, and that was introduced in 2020. So we can support both bills. Please help. We seek opportunities to work in coalition with like-minded organizations such as Public Citizen, the county and state health departments, the University of Arizona, and others to identify necessary and appropriate methods and actions to develop heat protection standards. Most recently, in the midst of this COVID pandemic, we received a grant from the National Climate Action Coalition, also known as the CAC, to address four more challenges. The first challenge was to adapt our in-person building resilient neighborhood workshops in a digital presentation on Zoom and test drive this presentation with several more high-risk communities. Our greatest challenge was finding high-risk or low-income Tucson communities that could participate in digital workshops because of the lack of access to broadband or Wi-Fi or even computers in their homes. These and other factors, like COVID, for example, have limited our ability to reach every neighborhood, either in person or on Zoom. The second challenge was to offer outreach to the newspaper media. We published an op-ed and 3 letters to the editor in the Arizona Daily Star about the concern for the health risks of extreme heat and need to systematically prevent heat injuries and deaths. And one of the authors, or maybe more, are here in this conference, in this meeting today. We also were challenge number 3, to update, reprint, and digitalize our citizens guide called The Readiness for Extremes in the Desert Southwest. And I'm going to show you a picture of it here. It's on, you can find it on the computer, but here's the guide. Very nice guide, has a lot of good information on it. And also a lot of information about agencies that can help. Finally, challenge number 4 is to work with local and state legislators to urge them to develop bills to establish policies with legally reinforced mandates for creation and implementation of standards for the protection of workers for extreme heat exposure, illness, and death. As I mentioned, Mayor Romero has committed to standards in the climate adaptation plan for our city. Also, State Representative Andres Caño and Senator Kirsten Engel and local labor union groups have committed to support for these efforts. In summary, it takes a village and not just a neighborhood, and we've only just begun. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you today. I would be happy to field any questions or comments you may have, and I have a few other things that have come up that we should know about. Mother Jones just published a very important issue on January 30th of this year, a new investigation about who's getting sick from heat-related illness should be a wake-up call for America. And there's also an article that I have here that says record heat batters Tucson mobile home residents with poor insulation of lack of cooling. And this is work being done at the University of Arizona, and there was a presentation made on the meetup group Climate Tucson that the organizer for might be in this meeting here today as well. And then we're also going to be making this presentation, which was canceled last year because of the COVID vaccine. It will be held remotely for the, trying to find its name, CPASW organization that brings people together from all over the country to address how to deal with climate adaptation measures in many different ways. So thanks again, and if you have questions or we can engage in some discussion about this, we'd really be happy to do that at this point. Donna.
Donna, go ahead. Please unmute yourself. Donna, you need to unmute.
Okay, thank
Sure.
you. Barbara, would you repeat the number and the title of Raul's bill again so we get that down and we can?
HR 3668.
8. Okay.
HR 3668. It
Okay.
is called the Ascension Valadez bill. It's Ascension, it's the Spanish ASCENSION, Valadez, VALADEZ.
Mhm.
I don't
Okay.
know the name of this. I don't know the name of the Senate bill. I'm sorry.
Okay.
If you check in the chat, I put in the number of the bill and a link to information about it.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Right.
All right. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. And they've moved the raise your hand function now so that it's in reactions. So go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see a little smiley face with a plus on it. And just click on that and you can raise your hand as Jackie Romer has done. Jackie.
Hi, my question is, do you see this as ground level work toward, obviously we have 118 degrees is a lot higher than when I was here in the 70s. Do you see this as the beginning of maybe forming heat refuge centers, large places where people can flock to all of a sudden if something does go out, similar to maybe, I don't know, gymnasium shelters for hurricanes and things like that have their own generators?
Well, this is something we've been trying to explore and identify more concretely within this community ever since we started doing this work. We've contacted the Red Cross, which is apparently responsible for establishing such centers that you're talking about. And there's schools and libraries. One of the questions is, which ones are they? Which they won't tell us because they want to be able to have control over where people go. And that will be a decision that's made, I think, in the event of an emergency, not at this point in time. But the question is, do these schools and libraries have generators?
Mm-hmm.
First of all. Secondly, how long will these generators last?
Yeah.
Thirdly, they require fuel to run, gasoline, I believe. I don't know a lot about generators, and in the event of a power outage, if that was the situation with the extreme heat emergency, we can't pump gasoline. So there needs to be gasoline storage somewhere. And I believe that there is a Pima County Disaster Preparedness Center here that we discovered when we were doing this work. It had just been built on, somebody else helped me, I think it was on Broadway, I'm not sure. We did go visit that center, and they will have emergency trucks with generators and perhaps hopefully enough fuel to move around the city, but that's not a large number of those. So, and how and where they would move around is a question and a problem. The people who know the most about who needs help in emergency are the people who provide home-based health equipment like oxygen or ventilators or other things in homes. And those folks are prepared to help those people right away because they know who they are and where they are. And then there's people in the medical community that are also organized around helping in disaster preparedness. But again, the facilities that you're asking about are a good question, a big question, an ongoing question we've had and not been able to answer satisfactorily. And it's difficult because we haven't seen an acute emergency disaster like the one that we were talking about with the power outage. And the risk is real. The probability of having it is questionable, and we don't have that kind of statistic to be able to say, well, this is going to happen. But it's a risk, and it's been also, there was an article written about this in the Journal of the Union of Concerned Scientists a few years ago, and about the vulnerability of our grid to extreme heat.
Do you have any idea what temperature that is that they anticipate the grid might go?
No, I mean, it's getting hotter every year. And then, of course, we have fires that heat up the grids and bring those grids down too, like that is happening in California. I mean, it's very circumstantial, a number of different factors. And I haven't seen statistics on how hot for how long.
What are the chances of having citizen oversight of these Red Cross facilities? Because it seems like we need to know that information.
Very good question. Very good idea. We post that to the Red Cross. They came and visited us in our meetings once or twice and didn't come back. But that's a good point. Good question. We've tried. We need more help in bringing that forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. We have a follow-up question from Caroline. Caroline Salcido, go ahead.
I was wondering if you know of any organizations that are working on actually preparing people from the southern United States to move to northern climates, because we're really at the top point of being able to stand living here in the summer anymore. So is anybody working on that you know of?
I don't know anything about that, but if anybody else does, let's talk about it. That's an interesting problem, and it's kind of a sad commentary on our planet. We need to be working a lot more and a lot harder on reducing the risks of these risks and many risks of climate change. And so we need to all roll up our sleeves and get busy and try to turn this thing around, because it's about climate change. And we know what it's caused by. It's caused by the fossil fuels in our world.
We have a follow-up question from Paula Schulzberg. Paula, please unmute yourself. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Barbara. I think you mentioned Climate Tucson meetup event. If so, what was the date on that, or the time period?
These are Karen Peterson's meetups that she's used to have at Ward 6 office and on a regular basis, and now they're being done on Zoom. I think I don't remember the exact date when she had the speaker from the University of Arizona, who's done a lot of work on the manufactured homes and their risk for extreme heat exposure, and a lot of these trailers or manufactured homes, which is more properly called, don't have adequate air conditioning either.
And the material they're made of is particularly heat absorbent. Yeah,
definitely. So call Karen Peterson, and I'm sure she could provide you with that information, and hopefully has a recording to share.
Yeah, I'll check with Karen. Thank you.
Sure.
Rosemary Bolza, you have a question. Please go ahead and.
Well, I have more of a comment. Our neighborhood had one of the workshops, and it was very good. But afterwards, I struggled to get better action. And I kept, for one whole year, I go to the campus community relation committee, and I ask, could we have a presentation on the university's emergency plan? And it never happened. I contacted TEP, and they came to our meeting, but they talked about the new poles that are going to be going in. And I've tried to get the fire department, but I'm not giving up. And I see that Barbara isn't either. And I think now is the time when people are not going to blow off the idea of emergencies. So I really hope that we can all start, asking about this and giving support to Barbara and the people that are doing the workshops.
All right, thank you. We have a follow-up from Joseph Danishewski. Go ahead.
Okay, Barbara, you mentioned that there was one neighborhood of senior citizens, I believe, that couldn't self-organize, but then there was another neighborhood that was able to help them. And I think it was an affluent neighborhood. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that came about?
The people from the more affluent neighborhood were part of our facility. They're one of our facilitators. One of them was, and a member of our Building Resilient Neighborhoods working group. So he was very much involved in the grant work that we did in providing a workshop to that high-risk neighborhood. He saw that the people just, first of all, there seemed to be some reluctance, or people perceived that they had a barrier to getting to know each other and sharing information about each other, phone numbers and names and so forth, addresses, that they thought they felt the city was restricting them from doing that. And I didn't understand that. We weren't able to find more about that. So they couldn't even develop a roster of who's who and what their needs were. But when the folks came from next door with under the auspices of Lend a Hand, are you all familiar with Lend a Hand? It's a wonderful organization that comes from Pima County on Aging that organizes volunteers, often seniors, who work to provide support services to people who are homebound or disabled, to get to appointments or to do their shopping or a lot of other things. And I have a neighbor who works on that. They have groups in a lot of different parts of the city. But so through Lend a Hand, they developed a food delivery service to the high-risk neighborhood, the senior housing community, and got to know those people. So they got to know who they were, where they are, and what the level of their risk and ability and their needs, and ability or lack of ability to help themselves in case of an emergency. And so they're there to help. A couple of guys, good guys, doing this. And there's a lot of people in Lend a Hand doing good things like this. Lend a Hand has had several of our workshops to their providers, their volunteers. And we've done these workshops for other groups as well. It's challenging, as we just heard from Rosemary, that people who didn't come to the workshop weren't interested. It's hard to get them involved. And I guess there needs to be ongoing meetings within neighborhoods to continue planning together of people who attended the workshop, because we're a very small group and we can't do all of that for everybody. So they can take the information and form a group of the people who attended and develop a plan. But it is a challenge. I certainly understand that.
Donna Branch, you mentioned in the chat that you have a question. Go ahead.
So Barbara, as part of the resiliency in the face of extreme heat, has there been any work done by anybody to see if nursing homes are actually prepared? I know they're required by law to have a plan in case of an emergency, but from what I understand, most of them say the plan is to evacuate their residents to the nearest hospital. Well, we don't have enough hospitals in Tucson, even without COVID. We don't have enough hospitals in Tucson for the number of people who are in nursing homes. So that means they really need to be ready to stay where they are, but I don't think there's a requirement that they have a generator. So how's that going to work? Doesn't sound very workable to me.
You're absolutely right. And we have not attempted to go into nursing homes to offer workshops. That's a very good idea. We have tried to identify which facilities are prepared to help people. It seems to be hospitals and the Red Cross
Yeah.
facilities.
Yeah.
But going into the work, going to the nursing homes would be a good idea. I did try to do one presentation to a group of deaf and blind, and that didn't go over too well because I couldn't get my workshop materials through to them. So,
That would be a challenge.
because of their
Yeah.
disabilities.
Right, right. My other comment was that although I haven't done it yet because I've been very involved in resisting the former occupant of the White House. But up here, we don't have a heat problem so much as particularly on this west side of the Cascade Mountains. It's generally quite cool, even in the middle of summer after the sun goes down and by 10 p.m. you want a sweater. It's cool. But what we do have is an earthquake possibility of a very severe 9-point-something magnitude earthquake that is overdue. And so the same principles that we use for building resilient neighborhoods, I have an anticipation sometime here in the next 2 years to do something in my neighborhood about preparedness for an earthquake, because we're out here across the Sound from Seattle and across the Tacoma Narrows Bridge from Tacoma. We're a long way from any organized assistance. So we are, and lots of trees that will block the roadways. So we are going to be on our own for several months. And I always believe it's best to know what's coming your way and get ready for it than to be surprised.
Yeah. It's interesting thinking about how we gather people in our neighborhoods, such as yours, which is spread out quite a ways together to help each other. And in our grant that we had this year, we were asked to try to facilitate reaching out to high-risk, low-income neighborhoods, and the African American community was one of those. And we learned that the place to try to organize that kind of work is in the churches. So we need to begin to think about other venues in which we can offer this.
All right, we have a question from Jackie Day. Jackie, go ahead and ask away.
Yes, Barbara, since we're not able to do these workshops in person, could you talk a little bit more about what's been developed as a presentation on Zoom and how those of us who might be interested in having that workshop presented by Zoom could get that happening?
Available on the National PSR website, and the Citizens Guide is also available on the National PSR website. And you just put the name of Building Resilient Neighborhoods, and it's available through our Arizona chapter page as well. And what we can do is offer a workshop here in our community with a facilitator, and we've done that. And what we would like to have is a commitment of a number of people who can get on Zoom and participate together, because we tried to do this by presenting it to a room full of people who didn't have computers and weren't on Zoom, and the communication just doesn't work because there's a whole lot of back and forth, asking people to think about problems and solve them together. There's breakout groups. They begin to think about various aspects of how you need to think about all the questions we raised in these workshops. Who's vulnerable in your home? How well prepared are you? Who's vulnerable in your neighborhood? What kind of things can you plan to do in case of an emergency? And there have been, as I mentioned, a lot of different ways people have approached that, but it requires interaction. And so it can be done on Zoom. There's a lot of tools on Zoom now that are absolutely great. You can do breakout rooms, or you can discuss together like we are now. The Citizens Guide is online too, that people can download, although it is I have to say, even though it's on the national website, it's designed for a Tucson community. Does that answer all the questions, Jackie, or what else? I mean, you do these workshops too, so Jackie, you might be a facilitator to lead this. You and several other people helped us with this grant to prepare this Zoom presentation.
I want to do one of these virtual, and I've got permission from our community, and we do have access to Zoom. So I'm really curious to know how it's going to come across and how it will be accepted.
Great. And you can talk to Gina and Frank, who has done these and all the tricks, but it's amazing. It works. So
Jackie Romer has a follow-up question. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. Barbara, I did approach my mom's home where she was living for several years about getting a generator and being prepared for heat. And they told me that they couldn't afford to do that. I do believe them. It seemed to be very difficult. So we got several portable solar panels and a $3,000 generator, and we had professional help in setting this up, and it would still not support any kind of cooling. It almost sounds like what you're saying is that we are in a situation now where we need as much energy behind this as we did to get rid of Trump. I just missed being in France because I used to go regularly. I missed, I think it was 2003 when 15,000 people alone in France died from heat.
that's right.
17,000 all over Europe. And we are a country with AC, but when you have no electricity, what can you do? Do you see this now? I mean, if you look at it very logically, do you see this as now we're at the point where we almost need a real political push for this, almost like a task force, a lot of energy behind it?
I see an extraordinary need for a task force nationally, statewide, locally, for climate mitigation.
Yes.
And climate adaptation. The problem is we can't just adapt because it's going to get worse if we don't do anything about the cause of the problem. We must be working on climate mitigation. And I think our community, Mayor Romero is very committed to this. We finally got a climate adaptation and mitigation plan adopted by the City Council and hopefully enacted as fast as possible. But I think that's the solution. Yes, we need to be prepared for emergencies, but I think it's even more urgent, far more urgent, to reverse the problem.
I don't know. If you ask me, which is more urgent, a 10-year plan or for me to get through the summer? I think it's to get through the summer without dying.
Yeah. Yeah, they're both needed, mitigation and adaptation. I agree. But I think everybody needs to understand that those two things go hand in hand.
We have a question from our board member, Susie Anderson. Go ahead, Susie, with your question.
Hi, thank you, Barbara, for this very timely, we're enjoying nice, cool, comfortable temperatures now, but they are going to rise. I have solar panels, and Robert Bulacek told me where to get information on batteries. But will the batteries work to help others in my neighborhood? Can they recharge things at my house then when we're using battery power? My house is big enough so that elderly who don't have solar panels can keep them cool for a certain amount of time. I'm just wondering if the batteries will work on a community level at all.
Point you made in there is a certain amount of time. I saw earlier that Robert Bulacek is in this meeting. If he still is, maybe he would be the best person to answer this question.
I think the real secret to longevity is combining both solar and battery backup. I have an efficient house, which means that I can run all night long from a single power wall. And on every somewhat sunny day, it charges all back up off my solar. So basically, the only way I would know the grid was down is my neighbor's porch light goes out, and I can operate indefinitely with heating and cooling, limited, not going wild, but I can heat and cool one room all night long, kind of no matter what. And so, yeah, it's a very resilient solution. It's not cheap. I paid as much for the battery backup as I did for the solar system. But the advantages, I have resiliency. Biggest reason for me to do it was I wanted to use my solar all night long so that I was net zero, not only on an annual basis, but on a minute by minute basis. The resiliency was just kind of an additional benefit for me. But yes, let me put my phone number and email address in the chat. And if anybody has questions about how you do it or how you add it to your existing solar, I'd be happy to answer them.
One of the questions was, how can you help your neighbors?
Well, if the grid goes down, margaritas are at my house. But to answer your question on a neighborhood scale, there are things called neighborhood microgrids that TEP could do, where, for example, they put a large battery at a substation, and so if the grid went down for a few hours, that could handle a neighborhood. The problem is it doesn't get recharged unless you've got solar combined with it that can recharge it the next day. So that's the real win-win situation, is you pair up the solar, the battery, and the microgrid, and you can operate pretty much indefinitely. But you've got to plan it that way.
Barbara, I've got a question for you. I was in Chicago in 1995 when the heat wave came through, and 700 people died in 5 days. It was really horrendous. One thing that the city did was to set up cooling centers, because a problem was that a lot of people could not afford air conditioning, or they lived in a neighborhood where it was not safe to have your window open at night. And the cooling centers were places where you could sit all day. I don't know if you could sleep in them, but would a solution like that make sense in Tucson?
Yeah, that was the same thing that was mentioned in the book that of the speaker that inspired this whole project from our conference, and I talked about at the beginning, where he studied this event. Cooling centers that we've been talking about, the cooling centers that have been identified but not revealed here in Tucson. They would be in schools and libraries, and the Red Cross is in charge of that. Again, there's questions about whether these facilities have generators and adequate fuel to support the generators, and how long they can be available to people. There could be, and there may be talk within the city, but I'm not sure about having much larger facilities that you're talking about, gymnasiums and auditoriums and things like that, where people could go. I'm not sure how well developed this is. I think the concept is out there. I think it would be really helpful for the city to take on defining this much, in the county to define this much more clearly for all of us. It seems to be the best kept secret in town so far, which is not good.
We have a question from Lee Oler, also a member of our board. Lee, go right ahead.
Hi, everybody. On the Chicago event, the tragedy, one of the things that saved a lot of people was that people were checking on their neighbors, and in neighborhoods where neighbors didn't talk, people did perish. But certain neighborhoods would, keep track of so-and-so across the street and that sort of thing. So that's another thing. And that wouldn't cost a whole lot for this. I know we try to do our neighborhood watch and all that kind of stuff, but that played a big part in whether you lived or died in the Chicago problem that Larry was talking about. Also, can I ask Robert a question, or anybody here? When you're talking about gymnasiums, they have would it be best if we could find cooling stations that didn't have all that excess air space that had to be heated or cooled before it reached the people?
that needed it. I mean, would a lower ceiling place be better, easier to cool?
I think that's why they're considering libraries and schools at this point.
Right, right. But you mentioned gymnasiums
Yeah.
and auditoriums and that sort of thing, and those things are really huge,
That's a good point.
high ceilings. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
Barbara, we are just about out of time. Tell us how we can support you and how we can contact you and find out more about your activities to prevent a heat disaster here in Tucson.
My email address is bwarre01@gmail.com. So contacting me directly would be helpful. We have a team of people who are prepared to help deliver workshops. What we would like to see is many more neighborhoods offer workshops, and again, that can be done on Zoom these days. And the idea would be to gather a committed mass of people to be on the call, so that, and what we do is facilitate discussing things together and planning together in these workshops. If you can gather a good group of people who would be committed to doing something, we can help you get the workshop, have it facilitated by one of our trained facilitators. We also have materials we can share with anybody who offers the workshop. We'll provide workbooks and the citizens guide for each person who attends the workshop, to be used for people who are going in through the workshop. The citizens guide is online, and it is called A Citizens Guide for Readiness for Climate Extremes in the Desert Southwest. And it's got a lot of useful information here besides the workshop material. And it's pretty. And the Glue Factory printed these for us, our own local printer, union printer. Anyway.
All right. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for sharing everything that you know and making us more aware of this issue. I want to thank you again for coming to today's meeting, and thank all of the members of Democrats of Greater Tucson for tuning in.